Today's talk is titled Looking Both Ways, to be delivered by Reverend Ken Reed Brown. Reverend Ken Reed Brown is Minister Emeritus at First Parish in Hingham, Massachusetts, the Old Ship Church. Having retired in 2022 after 35 years as minister there. Ken lives in Hingham with his wife, Susan. They have 3 grown and married children and 8 grandchildren. Ken earned a BA in philosophy from Haverford College and his Mastery of Divinity from the Starr King School for the Ministry in Berkeley, California. He currently serves as co-chair of the Interfaith Committee, which organizes the Listening to Other Voices speaker series at Glastonbury Abbey in Hingham, and on the Communications Committee and Coordinating Council of Elders Climate Action. And here's Ken.
Well, thank you, Margot, for that kind introduction. It's awfully good to be with you again. I was doing the math. I think it's been 5 years since I started addressing you, being with you a couple times a year. Began that back in the pandemic. You remember that, when you went onto Zoom services only. And it's always been good, always been wonderful to be with you in this way. I wish a continent didn't divide us, but there you have it. The miracles of modern technology bring us together. Thanks everybody who makes it all possible. Andy today and Randy, otherwise Julia, and our musicians. It's just quite wonderful the way you put it all together in this way, and I appreciate it. Once again, it's good to be with you. Now, we were reminded earlier of that we are in the midst of the High Holy Days on the Jewish calendar. So I won't be speaking directly about the High Holy Days. You heard a good message earlier. And I consider this sermon really to be a sermon that invites, certainly for me, and maybe for you, reflection on how we've been living our lives and how we might move forward to live our lives in the days and the year to come, which is what Jews are invited to do each year, and we can certainly benefit from that too, whether or not we are Jewish. Looking both ways. Many years ago, in our Old Ship newsletter, I've been going through my old newsletters, and every newsletter, whether it was weekly or monthly, I had a musing column, and sometimes about events going on in the world, sometimes about Unitarian Universalism, sometimes a little more personal. Well, quite a number of years ago, my musing consisted of this, of a reflection, something like this. It had been a beautiful morning earlier in the week, and I went for a run, as I do on many mornings. A bright sun, blue sky, it was quite lovely, and I ran up, there's a road, it takes about 2.5 miles from here, my home, to get to the top of something called Turkey Hill here in Hingham. And at the top of Turkey Hill, it's a conservation property. It's just a splendid view. You look kind of straight, more or less straight east, and you can just see a little bit of the Atlantic Ocean over the trees. Look towards the rising sun over some woods, look more or less northish, northwest, and you can see Boston. Well, I got to the top of the hill and I needed a breather, so I took a breather running up that hill, but it was also a time just to look, to take in the view. I looked out towards the Atlantic, over the woods, just splendid morning. And then I looked back to Boston, and it was one of those days, as it happened, when an ugly brown orange smog had settled over the city. Not a pleasant look. Now, had I chosen some other route, we have about the same distance away in a slightly different direction. There's a state park, Wampatuck Park, and I could have run into the park. No hills, no expansive views, just I would have been embraced by the beauty of the woods through which I was running. Maybe I've seen a couple of deer which I do in there sometimes, and blue sky through the woods and sunlight filtering in, it would have been beautiful. But that hadn't been my choice. Instead, I'd run up to the top of Turkey Hill, and I was presented with a more complete picture of the day, you might say. Having looked both ways, a more complete picture of the day, and by extension and metaphor, you may already be thinking this way yourselves, a more complete picture of our lives through the metaphor of looking both ways. It's not always easy or welcome to look both ways in this regard. But just as it's a matter of safety, we know this, as we're about to cross a busy street, to look both ways so that we see what might be coming. I would suggest that in a real, if slightly different sense, it might also be a matter of a certain kind of safety to look both ways in our lives, to take in both the beauty and the ugliness, happiness and sadness, joys and sorrows, the good and the evil. One of our hymns, number 17 in the Gray Hymn Book, if you want to take a look, it quotes the poet William Blake centuries ago to make this point. I'll read it. Every night and every morn, some to misery are born. Every morn and every night, some are born to sweet delight. Joy and woe are woven fine, clothing for the soul divine. Under every grief and pine runs a joy with silken twine. It is right, the poet goes on, it is right, it should be so. We were made for joy and woe. And when this we rightly know, safely, there's that word again, safely, through the world we go. Now, we surely might want to argue with Blake's assertion that, as he put it, it is right, it should be so. But there is no denying that it is so. And what if we understood at a profound level, really took it in deeply, that joy and woe are indeed woven fine, that life brings unavoidable sorrow and suffering, too often far more to some than others, and that life also brings a measure of joy, though far too little. We know this too, for some. What if we allow ourselves to accept the fact that this is the nature of life? Well, it seems to me that accepting that life comes with both joy and woe, and that we are not exempt from the woe. We may be more likely to live with greater equanimity. I love that word, equanimity, which is a sort of safety, I think, isn't it? As through the world we go, to use Blake's words. Not to mention be readier with empathy and understanding and compassion that comes from accepting the fullness of life, that we're all in this together, and therefore better be able to be among the helpers and healers in this world of ours. In this regard, I remember something my father said to my brother Jim years ago. We were youngish, maybe in our early 20s, something like that. And Jim had brought some trial, some difficulty that he was going through to my dad, and Dad said to Jim, "Welcome to the human race." That's the nature of life. Looking both ways, then, a matter of safety, it seems to me, whether on the street as we walk or in our lives as we live. But isn't it oh so human to want to dwell only on the beauty and love and goodness in the world? All too human to be drawn only to comfort and ease? Of course it is. I, for one, certainly love the beauty of a perfect fall day. We're having a lovely day here in Hingham. I don't know what it's like there. It's a little warmer than usual. Blue sky. I can hear, maybe you can hear the birds outside too. A splendid day, and I love the beauty of a perfect day as much as anyone, along with moments in any season that evoke what Rachel Carson calls that sense of wonder that we lose as we get older at our peril. But we can keep it alive. We can be our own good fairies, to use her language. So I love a beautiful day. I treasure my time with those I love. I enjoy a good meal. I savor my favorite tea every morning after breakfast as I read the sports section, if it's gone well for our Boston Red Sox. And then perhaps I read something else as I continue to sip on my tea, maybe one of my favorite old texts. And much of this, I expect, I feel I share a kinship with most of you. It's human. I think I feel a kinship too, I know I do, with hobbits. Do you remember hobbits? From Tolkien's Lord of the Rings and his first book, The Hobbit. Most of you may be familiar with them, a few of you may not. I'll say a little bit then. I'd read the entirety of The Hobbit and The Lord of the Rings to our son Adam. Oh gosh, must be 30 years ago or so. We got through the whole thing, and it took us a number of years. We took some breaks, but we got through the whole thing. I read it again this summer. I was moved to reread The Hobbit, and then kept going through the whole thing. At the outset this summer, I was imagining that rereading these volumes would be a kind of escape from the news that we find it so difficult to ignore and get away from the threats to our democracy, from Gaza and Ukraine, the daily assaults on the rule of law, and so on. But I discovered before long that far from being an escape, which it was in some degree from the daily news, I was at the same time being given a window into some deeper ways of understanding not only what's been going on in our nation and in the world, but also understanding how ordinary folks, that's most of us, right? How ordinary folks might choose to and be able to be present in the midst of it all and to respond to all that's going on. So bear with me. I'll tell you a little bit about hobbits, first of all. Within the first few pages of The Hobbit, we learn from Tolkien, our narrator, that hobbits, well, they're about half the height of humans. They're small, and they love their comfortable routines, from their pipes to their meals and much else. When the wizard Gandalf knocks on the door of Bilbo, a hobbit, Bilbo's hobbit hole, saying that he is, quote, Gandalf says, looking for someone to share in an adventure, Bilbo wants to have none of it. He's puffing on his beloved pipe, and Bilbo says, we are plain, quiet folk, and I have no use for adventures. Nasty, disturbing, uncomfortable things make you late for dinner. And then, over the course of these 4 volumes, hundreds and hundreds of pages, and the movies, which I think maybe I saw one of them, we learn how 5 diminutive, comfort-loving hobbits, Bilbo in The Hobbit, and then Frodo, Merry, Sam, Pippin, and Pippin in The Lord of the Rings, how they diminutive hobbits, rose to heroic heights in the midst of all sorts of dangerous, life-threatening adventures, surprising themselves and just about everyone else, all the non-hobbits, too, including the wizard Gandalf, even though it was he who had started the whole thing by encouraging and getting Bilbo to go on this initial adventure. All as throughout, the hobbits never stopped yearning for the comforts and pleasures of their home, back in Hobbiton, their simple lives. Here's one moment in the tale that suggests how, it seems to me, these hobbits have become adept, pretty much in spite of themselves, at looking both ways, as I've been describing it, and then living accordingly. Halfway or so through Lord of the Rings, Merry and Pippin, 2 of the hobbits, have been part of the conquest of Isengard, which had been under the control of one of the evil powers, Sauron. Well, they've been part of this conquest, a violent episode, and afterwards they were discovered by Gandalf, remember the wizard, and others of the so-called Fellowship of the Ring. Merry and Pippin were found lounging around at the gate to Isengard, smoking their pipes, enjoying the day. Well, then, after stories were shared back and forth, since they've been separated, back and forth as to what everybody had been doing, what they've been experiencing, and so on, Merry and Pippin showed everybody to the larder, which they, of course, had discovered, and they together shared a wonderful meal, and more stories shared, company, so on, among friends. Looking, I suppose we could say, and living both ways, right? And they just come from this battle, risking their lives, and they knew that more dangers awaited, maybe death even awaited, but they used this interlude that they knew that would be temporary to settle into the comfort and pleasure of this good meal shared among friends. This reminds me of a Buddhist story some of you may be familiar with, of a fellow who is hanging by a vine from the edge of a cliff. And at the bottom, underneath him, is a hungry tiger. And above him is another hungry tiger. If that weren't bad enough, chewing into the vine were two little mice. But the man spies a strawberry growing from the vine, takes it, eats, tastes, enjoys. How sweet. Both ways. Well, back to the hobbits. Does the example of the fictional hobbits in their time of struggle against destructive powers of evil help us to see how we, in our time, might more safely live our personal lives through this world of joy and woe woven fine, as well as safely, even with some greater measure of equanimity, live through these days of worry? So many worries and concerns for the fate of immigrants, for the lives of those in the midst of war and famine, these days of divisive rhetoric and political violence, days of deep concern for the fate of our great American multicultural experiment in democracy, not to mention for the fate of the earth and all life as the atmosphere heats and the oceans rise. So does the example of the hobbits in the midst of their struggle against evil powers, does it help us in our time? I think it does. Speaking personally, just about every day, my soul needs a daily time of reflection in the comfort of my easy chair. It's right over there, surrounded just outside. You can see some of it through the windows of our backyard, these beautiful trees, surrounded by green these days and soon multicolored leaves. Embraced by beauty, in other words, all while sipping my favorite tea, a healthier habit, it seems to me, than the hobbit's pipe. But in any case, my soul needs this daily time of reflection and peace. But at the same time, I know that to be fully human, to be a full participant, well, in our democracy, in life and daily life, in the pageant of life on Earth, our dear Earth, I also need to pay attention to the news. The hobbits, after all, have been living a life in seclusion from the powers of evil that have been gathering around on their borders, east and north and so on. But they hadn't been aware of any of that because others have been fighting the battles to begin with. But eventually the hobbits had to realize this. They learned that there were dark powers at work that would destroy their little world of comfort and ease unless some courageous souls, including hobbits, rose to the occasion, became heroic in spite of themselves. Now, all this applies not only to the wider world in which we live, and most of us are not going to live on the grand stage of single-handedly saving our democracy or saving the earth. We're part of these large teams of people working in those directions. But all this applies as well, in any case, to our personal lives, looking both ways, helping us to live through our personal challenges and sorrows with a greater measure of equanimity, even a sort of heroism. We've seen this as we see a friend or a neighbor rise to meet some personal challenge a day or a week or a month before wouldn't have thought they could, in ways that they wouldn't have thought they could, a kind of heroism. As for me, I remember the day so clearly that my father died almost 40 years ago, and then 25 years or so later, when my mother died. I remember those days so clearly. Both days I was just about overcome with grief and tears. Most of you know the depth of grief in one context or way or another. Yet also on both days, I very soon also felt embraced by love. The love of my wife, Susan, our kids, our wider families, caregivers, nurses who are nearby. Grief and love woven together. Remember Blake said, underneath every sorrow, grief and pine is woven of, oh, honey, but I got to get the words right. I'll look back here. Right, under every grief and pine runs a joy with silk and twine. Sometimes that joy is it's just about love, right? Now, I could have chosen to push away the love. We do that and let myself just wallow ever more deeply in the grief. Or I could have chosen to pretend that everything was really pretty much okay. After all, everyone dies. My parents had lived long lives, no need for too many tears. Or I could choose to accept it all, the depth of grief and the embrace of love. All of it, all woven together, helping me safely, I might really say, to go through the days that were ahead. With greater equanimity. Yes, the grief. Yes, the love holding me up, holding us all up together as we move through that time in our family. Looking both ways, eyes wide open, present to the fullness of whatever is happening in our lives, looking always, actually, this way and that way, up and down. What if you're so taken with the task in front of you, you don't look up? And as a singer-songwriter, Mark Arelli, who we love here in the East, he wrote a song, I think he called it Look Up or Looking Up. Look up to see angels, using that metaphorically, of course, angels, our better nature, God, however we might describe that, but there are powers that can help us. Or we're looking not only outwardly at what's going on, but looking within at our own inner resources, or the God within, as the Quakers put it. So looking always, they remind us that we're part of this tapestry of life. We're all connected. This extraordinary tapestry. And then the compassion can be evoked, can be awakened, compassion of the Buddha or Jesus in our own hearts. And that can evoke our inborn natural desire to help and heal in whatever ways we're able to help and heal our dear ones, our neighbors, our democracy. We're holding up a sign in a demonstration. We're helping to heal our democracy. This might be a rebirth of democracy. Somebody in the Joys and Sorrows said, glimmers of hope. That comes. Hope is a verb, Hope is a verb. We can help and heal, whether our neighbors, our democracy, our dear earth home. So remember, as I close, remember, hobbits were small. They loved their food and drink, their comfort, their peace. We may feel small, and we probably all love our food and drink and our comfort and our peace. So they were much like us. But they rose to the heroism demanded by the times in which they lived. Nourished by beauty, then, nourished by love. Dr. King called love the unifying principle of life. I love that. So nourished by beauty, nourished by love, we can, too, rise to some level of heroism, equanimity, surely, whether to meet a personal crisis or challenge, or to meet the crises of our times in which we live. We can, we are, we see it, we do it, we live it. Looking both ways, living both ways. So may it be.